The time is at hand.
The elusive dog-like creature attacks livestock, bleeding them dry of blood.
8 to 10 feet tall, shadowy aliens.
But I am telling you right now,
we need a great reset.
And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen.
The witching hour is a time of night that is associated with supernatural events whereby witches, demons, and ghosts are thought to appear and be at their most powerful. Definitions vary and include the hour immediately after midnight and the time between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. My name is Junebug Fugit, and you're in Dark Places. I've always heard these stories all my life about 3 a.m. and the crazy, weird things that happen at that time of night. It's in all those paranormal ghost hunter shows where the activity is always at its highest at 3 a.m. And you always hear of people going to the crossroads and making a deal with the devil at 3 a.m. So what's the deal? We had our house fire in 2009 at 2 a.m. Does that count? No, that was just a little case of arson. The next door neighbor wanted to get a big insurance claim and accidentally blew up our house with theirs. Oopsie. But this week on the show, I have some creepy 3 a.m. stories for you. Like this one. My neighbors have, on several occasions, called me saying my house was on fire, only for the illusion to recede shortly after. These are on either side of my house. My father also stays over on occasion when I'm out of town to take care of my dogs, and he is regularly awoken by an orange haze in the window only to see a fire across the street. It too recedes when he goes downstairs to see what it is. During a road trip from Ontario, Oregon to Winnemucca, Nevada, we were driving on Interstate 95. Around 1 a.m., my husband sees multiple people on the side of the road, waving us down. One of the vehicles had slid off the highway and rode down the bank. We stayed with them until emergency services got there and headed back on our way. It was around 3:30, and it was my turn to sleep. So I started dozing off when all the hair on the back of my neck shot up, and I was startled awake. At that same moment, my husband yells, "What is that?" I look up just as this giant bird/man is flying up the windshield. He says he saw it on the side of the road, grabbing an animal with its feet, and then it flew around the car. I remember looking at the clock, and it was 3:47. From about Marsing to Winnemucca, I could feel it following us. Everything in my body was screaming at me to get out of there. It was definitely a flight situation. Once we got to our hotel room, my husband brought it up to the attendant, and casually she says, "Yeah, that's the Mothman. It's pretty common down that stretch of highway. Glad y'all made it safely." Mothman. One night my husband was gone for work, and the kids and I were home alone. We live in a rural area with a forest backing up to the house. My room opens to the backyard. I was on the phone with my mom because she worked the graveyard shift, and I can't ever sleep when he's gone. Anyway, I glance at the time and realize it's 3:47, and then I hear the doorknob turn. Immediately, fear kicks in, and I yell for them to leave because I'm calling the police. It keeps turning. My mom can hear it turn also. I pull the camera up, and there's nothing on the porch, but the doorknob is visibly turning. My mom starts praying, and I start to turn on the lights. As I do, I see a very tall, almost translucent figure. It eventually stops, and I chalked it up to being tired or whatever, and my mind made it up at that moment. In the morning, before I tell my husband what happened, my daughter joins us at the dining room table. She said she woke up at 3:50 and happened to glance out of her window and noticed a humanoid-type creature that was staring at her at the edge of the property. She said it reached the last branch of the tree, which is about 10 feet off the ground. She ran to her brother's room, but by the time she got back to show him, it was gone. She also chalked it up to being tired. There was something that followed me home. I went to the park with my friends, since it was the last day of summer. I was starting the 10th grade because I remembered the next day was the first day of school. I was awake every hour on the dot until 3 a.m. I saw something sitting on my computer chair. I thought it was my mom. It looked like her. It was dark. My vision is minus 2.20. I don't know what that means. I thought my mom was in my room. I thought my mom and dad had an argument. The chair is 3 feet from my bed and I am calling to my mom. Are you okay? I started moving my feet and began sitting up. The thing stood up. It was tall and had a hunched back. It looked like some cloak of shadows in a ghillie suit. It then jumped on top of me, and I started to scream for my mom. Mom! It covered my mouth, and I couldn't move my body. I was in a plank. I started to pray, and it let go. I turned on the lights, and I was in the corner of the room, scared to death. I stayed in that corner for 45 minutes, and my room was very cold. I opened my door and went to use the bathroom. My mom saw me after I used the bathroom. I told her what happened and she said, "You are always with your BS. Go to bed. Tomorrow is school and you think you're smart, trying to skip the first day." I was dumbfounded. I slept on the couch for 3 months. That room was always cold until one day I got mad and said to whatever was in there, "I want you to leave." I came back home and the room was warm. I slept with a nightlight until I was 23. Can't even make this stuff up. My mom never believed me. When she passed, I told my dad, and he believed me. He said that I don't make stuff up. He told me stories about experiences he had growing up. He had seen stuff in his home. He saw some dark shadows in the basement, stuff running through walls, medicine cabinets slam open and slam on their own, entities fly under doors. My dad said there are things in this world that you will experience and it doesn't make any sense, but you cannot be scared. It's your mind that makes you scared. One of the hardest men I know. Shadow/Hat-Man paid a visit to my sister and I on separate occasions in the same house. My personal encounter was years after hers. I was about 10 to 12 years old. I had just gotten over my fear of sleeping in the dark and of lightning. I was a very sensitive kid. Anyway, a flash of lightning woke me up, and my nightstand clock read 2:59. Then seconds later, as I'm laying in bed, there's another flash of lightning, and I see a tall figure standing in the doorway/foot of my bed. My bed was directly in front of the doorway. Another flash of lightning, and I swear I saw yellow eyes. I jumped up from my bed and ran through the doorway to get out. When I passed through the figure, I landed on my side outside my door. When I called for my mom and my sister, my voice completely changed. It was deep and crackling. My friend and I had finished a recording session of our music. We were only in high school at the time and just started a band, so we had been recording for hours. We got tired and called it a session, and we planned to stay here and take rest in our bedroom recording studio. I was nearly asleep when my friend shouted, alarming me and making a great display of rejection. Laying down, I was still, aware of all this, and could not move at all despite my attempt. He says, "It just touched my leg. Something just brushed up." I was struggling to sit up against the weight and darkness on my chest until I finally budge and slowly get to sit upright. After our clamor, he turns on the lights, frantically looking for answers with racing breath and eyes. As to what transpired, we were at a loss, shocked and confused. I had no idea. We both knew something made a stride for us while we fell asleep. To settle our nerves, we tried to connect with the outside world, so we turned on our FM radio to hear some music or a talk show, just so we could calm down. When we turned the volume up to hear a station, we only heard what could be described as strange, atmospheric, and distorted tones and crackles. He was not interested in what signal was coming through, though, so he turned it off with even expanded distress. I thought maybe it was an experimental music show, but he did not find it as any consolation, only a clear sign that something strange showed up at 3 a.m. This one is kind of like what my sister experienced one time. Pretty freaky. The night my grandma died, I had a really weird experience, but it was at 3:30 a.m., not 3. I randomly woke up to something hovering above me that looked like a black gas cloud. It was darker than the pitch black darkness in the room, but I could see the distinct outline of it. I've heard stories about people who have had weird experiences on the night that a loved one died, but all those sounded positive and felt loving. This was the exact opposite. I've never felt such fear and terror in my life. I screamed pretty much immediately, so hard and loud that it hurt my throat, and pulled the covers over my face. When I did that, I could feel it lift, so I immediately grabbed my phone and used it as a flashlight to search the room, but I didn't see anything. I laid there for a bit, and then I heard someone coming upstairs, which turned out to be my former stepmom. After she went in her room, I rolled over and turned my back to where I saw the cloud, but I felt uneasy, and then it felt like a single finger charged with electric touched the back of my neck. I decided to just ignore it and go to sleep. You'd think it was over, but unfortunately not. The next morning I woke up and mentioned it to my stepmom, since I figured she'd listen. Turns out she had woken up randomly a bit earlier than I did and had trouble falling back asleep. She decided to let the dogs out and get some fresh air. She said when she passed by the door of the room I was in, the door started shaking uncontrollably, as if someone were trying to get out of it. So she stopped, watched it for a second, and then it stopped. I assume this is what actually woke me. I then had mentioned I screamed so hard that it hurt my throat, but despite the house being filled with family from out of town, including occupied rooms on both sides of the room I was in, no one heard me scream. I still don't know exactly what happened, but I know for a fact it wasn't sleep paralysis, as most people say when I tell them the story. About 6 months later, when I was at home halfway across the U.S., I woke up to another cloud in the corner of my room. I immediately shook my then girlfriend to wake her up, and in doing so, I hurt her a little bit without knowing. But unfortunately, by the time she woke up, it was gone. I've not had any experiences like this for about 3 years, but for a long time I'd wake up randomly crying, screaming, confused, feeling like someone or something had been near me. Countless nightmares, sleep paralysis, and other issues plaguing my sleep. I'm thankful I haven't had issues, but it's always in the back of my mind. The first bad haunted house I lived in alone was back in 1994. Between 1 to 3 a.m. every night, and I mean absolutely every night, there was a gigantic smash in the living room, as if a massive crystal punch bowl fell from the ceiling and shattered into 1,000 pieces on the hardwood floor. My 2 cats would scatter from the bed, and I'd sit bolt upright and go check, only to discover nothing at all was out of place. Some months later, the county detective who lived in the apartment above me revealed that my apartment, just prior to me moving in it, had been raided by the police, and was why he was installed by the county in the apartment above mine, to keep an eye on what was going on there, and in my apartment. They busted a local drug trafficker, but were also surprised to find the big living room, about 20 by 20 square, had a giant pentagram painted on the entirety of the floor. And they also found a teenage girl who had recently gone missing, being held against her will in a small confined space. Aside from being traumatized, she was otherwise okay, guessing probably has PTSD from it to this day. In a house we lived in while I was in high school, I woke up at 3:37 almost every night. Sometimes there was a tall shadow figure in my room. I only saw it about 4 times, but every time I saw it, it had gotten closer to me, until the time it was standing over me, leaning with its head less than a foot away from mine. There was something that would mimic our voices late at night too. My mom heard it mimicking me at first. I woke up at that same time one night and watched my bedroom door close. It was already closed when I went to sleep, so this thing opened it, and I thought I heard my dad say something. Checked with him in the morning, and he hadn't been anywhere near my room. The last time I woke up at 3:37, I was an adult now, and we lived in a different house. I woke up because it sounded like someone had thrown their full weight against the floor next to me. I thought maybe I had hit my head or kneed the wall in my sleep, but nothing hurt. And the other side of the wall was outside. Even if something was thrown against the side of the house, it wouldn't make the sound that it did. Now that I think about it, it was more of a bang coming from inside the wall. In our old house, my wife and I were sleeping. I woke up around 3:30 or so. I checked the time, doing that thing where you see how much longer you have until you have to wake up. It's dark, but not pitch black in the room. I'm facing the end table, away from my wife. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a shadowy figure move at the foot of my bed. It approaches me, and in my wife's voice, leaning down next to my face, I hear it say, "It's time to wake up. The visitors are here." Thinking it was my wife, I just said, "What?" It replied, still in my wife's voice, "Well, the visitors are here, and you need to go and let them in." I saw the figure stand up and walk past the foot of our bed and out the door. I flip over, wondering what in the world my wife is talking about, and I feel her sleeping next to me. I look over and my wife is still asleep, facing away from me. I started freaking out. There was no way my wife could have gone out of the room like that and then ended up beside me without me seeing her. I was frozen with fear. It felt like I couldn't breathe. I finally wake up my wife and ask her if she just talked to me, and she was just as confused as I originally was. I didn't get up to look at what left the room, and I didn't fall back asleep for the rest of the night. I have no idea what happened, but it still shakes me to think about it. A few years ago, maybe 2018 to 2019, in the house we've been living in for 16 years, I woke up suddenly around 3 a.m. when I looked at the clock after this happened, out of my sleep one night. In the glow of my husband's alarm clock display, I saw the slender figure of a pale, skinny boy standing at my side of the bed, with his arms out toward me. In a few nanoseconds, my brain went from registering this figure as one of my sons in his underwear, who must have been sleepwalking, to absolute terror when my eyes darted to see an expressionless face with dark, hollow eyes and very dark hair. Like a kid? I immediately realized this was not one of my boys and screamed and threw my body back into my sleeping husband. He jumped up, confused, and yelled, "What? What's happening?" It was gone. I grabbed onto my husband and felt my whole body vibrating. I told him there was a boy next to my side of the bed, but he grew up with stuff like that, so he just yelled for it to go and held me. It was not sleep paralysis. I never had it, and I had full control over my body to scream and move away very quickly. Over the years, we've had some experiences, far and few between, mostly noises and something rummaging through my children's toy box, but only once did my son see a boy walk into his room. This was many years earlier than what happened to me that night. Haven't seen or heard anything since. This person has 2 stories. I grew up in a house that literally backed up to a cemetery, which about 75% of the graves were moved to a different location up the road. The house was built in the 1910s and was very tiny for a family of 4. I had probably close to 20 experiences in that house, but many of them happened randomly. However, there could have been more around 3 a.m. These are just 2 that I will remember forever. The first, I was around 8 or 9, It was a few days before Christmas, and my father, who is/was a policeman, was scheduled to get off around 2 a.m. It wasn't unusual for him to be late, though. My room and my parents' room were separated by a hallway that went directly from their room to mine, with a closet in between. Literally, if both doors were open, I could see my parents' bed. Well, my father would often turn on the light for the hallway separating our rooms to put away his gear. On that night, without ever hearing my father come in, the light turned on and the closet door opened. I sat up and I saw a hand on the edge of the door, which I assumed was my father using the door to balance as he untied his boots while standing. After a few minutes, the light turned off, but I heard no movement, and the closet door didn't close. Probably within a few minutes, my father came in the front door. I froze completely and glanced toward the clock on the wall, and it was 3:02. Another night, I believe it was springtime because the windows were open in my bedroom. I was having trouble falling asleep, and I kept thinking I heard or felt someone walking into my room. I kept looking toward the hallway, toward my parents' room, thinking it was my mom or something, and I just kept seeing what I would later refer to as the swirls. I don't know if this is common, and I've never really looked into it, but I would often see darkness pixelated. In that hallway, I would often see the pixels rotating in a large circle. I had become so accustomed to seeing it that I never thought much of it. I just assumed that my quickly deteriorating eyes caused me to see that. On this night, as I waited for my father to get home, I kept sitting up in my bed and looking out the window to the street. As I was turning back around, the swirls seemed like they were getting closer. I kind of leaned forward and something touched my face from along the wall. It felt like ice-cold fingers. I turned to my right and saw nothing. When I looked back toward the swirl, a man, probably 50s, grayish-brown hair, big nose, and wearing overalls and a white long-sleeve shirt, was standing at the foot of my bed. I tried to yell, but nothing came out. After a moment, he turned toward the living room door and disappeared. I assumed this guy was either something from the house or the cemetery, but one night my mom was asking me if I had ever experienced anything in the house, which, again, I have quite a few more things that happened. I was telling her about the first story, about the hand on the door, and she felt compelled to interrupt and tell me about a man in overalls who stood at the foot of her bed when she was a child before disappearing. She described him very similarly as I remembered, so I don't know what it was, but it definitely gave me a double case of the heebies when I think about that night. I live on a hilltop in rural Appalachia. A few summers back, I woke up around 3 a.m. I remember I grabbed some water, walked outside in my underwear, and looked up at the sky. I saw what I honestly think might have been a UFO. It was long, blue, and had a weird transparent glow to it. No lights on it. I feel like I could have shot at it and hit it with my pistol. It was incredibly low, maybe only just 10 stories up, but it was bigger than a semi and trailer. Then it started floating eastward, and I lost sight of it behind the tops of the trees. The whole thing was maybe 45 seconds long. The whole time I was sort of just staring and watching, like it was a show. And then I realized what I saw and freaked out. Woke up my girlfriend and texted my neighbor, who didn't respond for like 2 days. Some time ago, I was playing some Black Ops 3 with a friend, and I hopped out for a moment because I wanted to go to the kitchen and grab something to drink. The thing is, to reach the kitchen, I have to go through a hallway and cross the living room. Because my mom sleeps in the room right next to mine, and I didn't want to wake her, I didn't turn on any lights. This is normal in me because the light that comes from my room is enough for me to see where I'm going. It's not super brilliant, but it's enough for me to recognize what is in the living room. And I've done that a lot of times. The thing is, when I was exiting my room, there was someone who was standing in the living room. At first I thought it was my mom, but whatever this was, it remained silent and staring at me. So it clearly was not my mother. I freaked out a bit and thought it was a thief. So I decided to make as if I didn't see anything and let her get what she wanted. At this point, I was sure it was a woman because I could see well enough. The next day there was nothing lost or broken, so whatever this was, it was not a thief. The thing is, this person had a weird figure. Looked like it made this fishing hook like figure with her back and looked at me, turning her neck sideways. I didn't tell this to my mother because I didn't want to scare her, but years later I decided to tell her, and she talked to me about my great-grandmother who died because a truck ran over her. The thing is, I've never saw her because she died 15 years before I was born, and I never saw any photos of her. How do I know it was her? Because the way she looked at me was the same way she used to do my mother, and this is the thing that freaked me out the most. Because when my great-grandmother got old, she got a rare disease from the bones which made her develop the figure I described before with her back, the fishing hook-like one, which forced her to move her head in that peculiar way when she wanted to see the right or left. This could be nothing, but honestly, for me, it's just way too many coincidences, because how am I supposed to know what she looked like if I have never seen her anywhere? Also, how could I even describe the way she looked when she had a disease which not only I didn't know she had, but was also so rare? So it's 3 a.m. You've got these witches, these demons, Hatman, aliens, all this creepy stuff going on. And to make matters worse, 3 a.m. is when most normal people are sleeping, and 5G towers are said to be at their peak. And you talk about some evil stuff. 5G towers. These things emit these powerful frequencies and throw people's bodies out of balance with nature and timing and everything like that. Mind control, you name it. It all works with those frequencies. Pretty evil. In the Bible, it says that Jesus died on the cross at 3 p.m. So it kind of makes sense that all this evil stuff happens at 3 a.m. Pretty weird, huh? Now I've heard people say that your most powerful time of prayer can come at 3 a.m. If you wake up at 3 a.m., you feel some kind of evil presence in your room, you pray. Or if you have some kind of weird dream and you just wake up at 3 a.m., maybe that's God's way of telling you you need to kind of pay attention. Could be some kind of prophecy or something like that He's trying to show you. But there you go, 3 a.m. Freaky stuff. We are woefully out of time. It's not even 3 a.m. And we will see you right here next week. Thanks for listening. God bless.